Hello, I'm Matt Williamson at Williamson NFL. How's everyone doing? I am great. Weather is getting a little better. Inching towards the draft. It kind of feels like an inching, though. There's not a lot of news. A lot of teams are at pro days. We'll get more maybe tomorrow or then later in the week. I'll update visits, but that has not been a big thing. The big visit, obviously, has been Aaron Rodgers, and the Steelers skipped Michigan's pro day. Well, they didn't skip, but Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan did to hang with Rodgers. It's not like they didn't have any representation at the Michigan Pro Day. So if Kenneth Grant's on the board, they still might take him, folks. Don't look into that. But that is one that they always heavily attend and take guys out to dinner. So this Rodgers stuff is probably pretty serious. Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk is basically saying it's just a matter of time. It's going to happen. I believe it will. I don't have any scoop on that. But an interesting thing I found today that Warren Sharp put out, and I'm a big fan of his work. You can check out his website. He's an analytics guru. He's actually very heavy in the betting world, which correlates with one another, to say the least. But I want to preface this. I think you know that the Steelers are still amongst the best off with available cap space. So they still have a lot of cap space. Now, some of that's going to go to hopefully Aaron Rodgers, but a quarterback. I mean, a nice chunk will, but they still have a lot of spending power. And for example, if they don't get a running back they like, or maybe they even do it before, go sign J.K. Dobbins if you want, or Jedrick Wills, the swing tackle from the Browns. Some of these guys that have been looming out there, you could get on deals. There's going to be guys that are cut. There's going to still be teams that are looking to create their own cap space and, hey, give us a 7th round pick for this $8 million contract guy that's a good player, but really it's only worth $5. So realize that they do still have, and they have the ability to make more cap space. So please realize that, because the rest of this is not going to be very favorable, by the way, this podcast, but please realize their best assets still to improve the team as we stand here in late March is their available cap space. So that is part of this. But why I'm really going into this and what Warren Sharp put out is he devised what everyone's draft capital is, all 32 teams. And it's basically using, I don't know what chart he used, the Jimmy Johnson chart or whatever. But he put a value from like 1 to 100 in terms of what teams have the most and least draft capital right now. Like the Steelers don't have a 2nd round pick, so that hurts their cause quite a bit. And now the other thing we've talked about a lot is they are in line, Pittsburgh is in line for a lot of comp pick compensation a year from now. So, it wouldn't shock me if at some point, probably on draft day, they traded their 2026 3rd round pick or 4th round pick to increase their current draft capital. But you might want all those to move up in the 1st round for the quarterback that you adore, So I'm not saying they definitely will use that, but they will use, they do have that at their arsenal. They can't trade the comp picks yet because they have not been awarded, but you could trade your current 3rd rounder knowing that a 3rd round comp pick or 2 is on the way. Interesting. The other thing you want to happen in the comp world is you would love Russell Wilson to sign as big a contract as possible before the draft. After the draft, the comp pick world is over. So a lot of this hay is in the barn in terms of picks for this year, though. Now it's subject to change. Like Washington traded for 3 players lately. Lattimore at the trade deadline, Debo, and Tunsil. Now, teams could still do that. And as it stands right now, remarkably, all 32 teams do possess their 1st round pick. It's the first time I can remember that all 32 teams right now still own their their respective pick in round 1. So there's no one that has multiple picks. There's no one that's without a 1st round pick as it stands right now. But I do think what Warren did is very cool in terms of The first overall pick is worth slightly more than the second overall pick. The 238th pick is worth slightly more than the 239th, much like the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, or the trade charts that these teams use. So we'll get into that real quick, and this is the part you're not going to love. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all the madness. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to a $200,000 bracket contest, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. So, if we look at the teams with the most draft capital, to put this in some perspective, the Cleveland Brownies, who have basically had the least draft capital year after year since trading for Watson. I mean, no first-round picks over those three drafts. I think only 1 second. I mean, like, they have done nothing in the draft for 3 years. Well, right now, the Jags and the Browns have the most draft capital as we speak here on March 25th. And he gives them a score of 88 points. That's number one. They're tied for one. Tennessee's next at 84. The Patriots at 82. The Giants at 81. The Niners at 78. Seattle, after the DK Metcalf trade, is at 77 and the Geno Smith trade. Carolina's at 75. The Saints are at 75. Those are the top 9. The Raiders are at 73. And obviously, the teams that were terrible last year are going to have higher picks in every round. You know, I mean, the Titans did trade a third-round pick for Snead. That's why they're not number one, I assume. The Browns also traded Amari Cooper to get more picks. I mean, so these terrible teams are going to have more unless they traded a bunch of assets away. So those are the top 10. Browns are the only one in the division at the top. The Ravens are the next best in the division. They're at 16th. They have 61 points of draft capital, right in the middle of the road. And as they always do, and I think the Steelers are going to be very much on this boat going forward too, Baltimore is great in the comp game, and it goes a long way. It's been missing here for a while. The Bengals have 55 points. That's tied with the Cardinals and Eagles tied for 19, 20, 21st in terms of draft capital. So a little below average, but I think they have all their picks from what I remember. Now at the very, very bottom, the Minnesota Vikings only have 34 points. They're last. Now, if you recall, I'm sure you not on top of the Vikings draft situation, but they don't have a pick on day 2 this year. They have a 1, they have a 4. They traded up for McCarthy. You know, they made a lot of moves last year. So they're very light on draft capital. You also have to think some of these teams that are light on draft capital are apt to move back in the first round to gain more. We'll get to that. Washington has the second least. They only have 37 points. And again, they traded for Lattimore. They traded for Tunsil. They traded for Debo. Some of those are future picks, but still it's a lot out of this year. And, oh, by the way, they were a Final Four team, so their picks in every round were late. Unfortunately, your Steelers are 30th. Only the Commanders and Vikings right now have less draft capital than the Steelers. He gives them a score of 42 points compared to 34 for the Vikings, 37 for the Commanders. Some teams right above the Steelers, Atlanta at 44, the Lions at 46, the Rams at 49. So obviously trading for DK Metcalf, and you may be aware of this, the Steelers did not have a losing season. You know, they don't do that. So they're picking in the 20s yet again, and they don't have comp stuff really in their favor this year. They don't have a second round pick, but they're not really devoid. I mean, they're okay in the draft world, but compared to the rest of the league, their draft cash in the bank right now is very low. It's only ahead of Washington and Minnesota. Now, I don't believe this to be a particularly good draft, but I do believe day 2 is pretty fruitful, especially for D linemen, for running backs, things that I think the Steelers are going to be in the market for. How do you get more draft capital? To me, there's 3 routes, and I don't know that any of them are worth pursuing. They're all worth considering, but trading back from 21 is the most logical one. If there's a handful of players you feel comfortable with when you're on the clock at 21, I would love to go back to 27, 28, maybe even 24, pick up day 2 capital. Some of those, better teams might move from 29 to 21 and give you their late second, or maybe you have to throw in a 5th or a 6th or something like that. And if you're comfortable with what's on the board, that's the most logical solution. If you're not comfortable with what's on the board, you just grab Kenneth Grant or whatever and don't have a second round pick, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And that's rough. It is. The other option, as mentioned, they could trade next year's picks. I have zero interest in trading next year's first or second. Not going to do it no matter what. Could be a terrible year. I know they always have a winning record. But it could be a bad year where things bottom out and you end up in the top 10 for the first time in forever in what might be a good quarterback draft, or you frankly probably going to need a quarterback no matter what. So I am not trading 1 or 2. I would consider trading 3 or 4, knowing that I'm going to get more comp stuff back, as we mentioned. But as a rule of thumb, if it's draft day and I trade next year's 3rd, that probably only gets me a this year 4th, give or take. You know what I mean? And that's not great. I'm not thrilled to get rid of what might be the 15th pick in round 3 a year from now for a 4th round pick this year, at the top of day 3. Lastly, and I think this is becoming less and less possible, is you could trade George Pickens. To me, that's the only guy on the team that you could trade that would give you day 2 capital. Would give you significant picks. Frankly, I don't love it. I think you just run with it, you roll with it, you see where this lands, put Metcalf and Pickens out there, and go from there. The other 2 options to me are much more appealing, but not 100% necessary either. You know what I mean? Like, if you only ended up with what you have and it's minimal draft capital and not a great draft, okay. And oh, by the way, remember, quite a few of your draft picks from a year ago are going to come back as pseudo rookies again. It's a factor, but you'd love to have more the merrier. You know what I mean? Like, rather have made more picks this year than not having more picks this year. I don't think you need me to clear that up for you. And you could still, going back to the beginning of the podcast, come full circle. Okay, we don't have much draft capital. We didn't really like how the running back situation went. Call J.K. Dobbins up. I keep bringing him up because I'm a little intrigued with him. And I had no intentions of going free agency in the running back situation, and the Gainwell thing surprised me. But if you don't have a lot of draft capital, you can't get everything. And I definitely want to go D-line like crazy in this draft. So I just keep bringing up J.K. Dobbins as a side note. I could live with Dobbins, Warren, and Gainwell, and an undrafted free agent or 7th round pick or something like that. But again, you have the cap space to still get better, but the draft capital is really lacking. And frankly, right now it's 3rd worst in the league. All right, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow. Maybe we'll mailbag it up tomorrow.